Our fifth distinctive, and things to understand if you want to understand Tanakh, is the concept of covenant. Now, we talk about covenants a lot today, and we talk about the covenant of Israel as if it's something which was old. We call it the Old Covenant. In fact, we even call that part, or the Tanakh, we call it the Old Testament. And of course, testament is really another word for covenant. And so that's why we can talk about the Old Testament as if somehow it is something which is past, it's old, it's been there, just like an old pair of shoes. And essentially you might wear them occasionally, but essentially they're best really to put on some, to throw it out or to throw away into an op shop or something. But essentially that's not the understanding of covenant at all. Because one has to understand what a covenant is. A covenant is essentially a promise, but it's a promise made from a higher authority to a lower authority. If I just make a promise to my wife or I make a promise to a friend, that's just a promise. But when God makes the promise to His people, it becomes a covenant. Now we need to understand that the covenants do not have an expiry date. There is no such thing as an old covenant and a new covenant, as if somehow the new covenant supersedes all the others. Well, we need to understand that the new covenant that Jesus talks about in the New Testament is not new, but rather it's connected to what was happening in Tanakh. In fact, the new covenant he refers to is one of the covenants of the Old Testament. Now, there's 4 essential covenants within Tanakh. 4 covenants. The first covenant we call the Noahic. Now, the Noahic covenant is, of course, related to Noah. You may remember the story of Noah, that the floods came down, and in fact you may even be able to sing the Sunday school song, but I'm not going to sing it to you, just in case you thought I might. The reality of it is that at the end of that particular situation, when Noah and his family came out of the ark, God made a covenant. He made a promise to Noah and all of mankind that would proceed from Noah, and that was that He would never destroy the earth in that same way again. And the symbol or sign of that covenant was the rainbow. Of course, one of the signs or the seal of the covenant was the shedding of blood. And so what Noah does is he makes a sacrifice. He builds an altar and he does a sacrifice, and the blood seals the covenant. It's kind of like in the old days when you used to sign something. When King John signed the Magna Carta, what he did was he took some wax and he dripped the wax onto the Magna Carta, and he took his seal and he sealed it in the wax. The concept of the wax and the seal and all those concepts of sealing that covenant, that contract, comes in the concept of sacrifice and the sacrificing of those animals. As they get sacrificed and their blood becomes the seal, becomes the in a sense, the symbol of the completion of that contract. And so the Noahic covenant is with the sacrifice, and God's response is the rainbow to show that He would not destroy the earth that way again. But of course, Noah is pre-Torah. So what it means is pre-law. The first law covenant, the first covenant that connects Israel to God and really binds God to His people Israel, is the covenant with Abraham. So the Abrahamic covenant. And the Abrahamic covenant, essentially, like most of the covenants, has 3 parts. And the parts are, I will bless you, and you will be a blessing, and all the nations will be blessed through you. That's the promise that God makes to Abraham. That promise, you need to understand, is that the Abrahamic covenant forms the golden thread that runs through the whole Tanakh and into the New Testament. You need to understand that the whole life of Jesus, the things that Jesus came to do, was to help fulfill and to live out the Abrahamic covenant. He said, how do we come to terms with that? Is that what we need to understand is that we're not just some nomads drifting around looking for pastures. We are people who are blessed by God. We are blessed. But we're not blessed for ourselves. We're blessed in order to be a blessing. And in fact, not just to our own people, not just to our own tribe, not only to our own ethnic, to our own clan, but we are meant to be a blessing to the world. If you read Amos and Hosea, one of the big things that comes out of both of those prophets is that one of the reasons why God was punishing Judea, one of the reasons why He punished Israel, was that they had ceased to be a blessing. It's an important concept for us to understand in terms of the church today. in saying, are we being the blessing to all nations, or just to our own particular constituency? So that's the Abrahamic. But the Abrahamic covenant then had to be put into an action, saying, how do we live out that? And what we get then is called the Mosaic covenant. And of course, this is the covenant with Moses. That again has three parts. It says, I am your God, and you will be my people, so long as you obey my commands. And of course, this is connected with the Ten Commandments, but more than in the Ten Commandments. And we'll talk about law in a later module. But the reality of it is that it's about coming together with God. It's about following God's direction. It's about living within the boundaries that God would set for our lives. That's essentially what the Mosaic covenant is about. It's about how do we live out being a blessing. Well, we live out being a blessing by, first of all, knowing who we are. We are God's. And then also by then doing what God would have us do. The Mosaic covenant. The fourth covenant is called the Jeremiah covenant. The Jeremiah covenant. And the Jeremiah covenant is the covenant that Jeremiah looks forward to in Jeremiah chapter 31 when he says, I will make a new covenant with my people. No longer will my law be written on tablets of stone, but on tablets of flesh. That you will not have to be taught the law, but you will know it from within. That was the new covenant that Jeremiah was talking about. Because what he realized was that, in fact, the old covenant, the covenant based in the temple, the old covenant based in rituals and sacrifice and all those things, that essentially that didn't work. It didn't help people understand that they were a blessing and that they needed to be a blessing. And so what Jeremiah looks forward to was the time when, in fact, God would place His word in people's hearts. And they would do it because they knew it to be right. They knew it because God was working from within them rather than in some ritual outside them. It's that covenant that Jesus celebrates and seals in the upper room. When He lifts up the chalice and He says, this cup is the new covenant sealed by my blood. Sealed by my blood. What you need to realize is that when He lifted up that cup, what He was essentially saying is that covenant which Jeremiah had spoken about in Jeremiah 31 is now fulfilled, is now seen to be put into practice through the death of Jesus on the cross. That in the death of Jesus on the cross, the new covenant has been enacted. This new covenant now to seal the law of God, the will of God on our hearts rather than in our ritual.